think the timeline for the vaccine's moved?
And here we go.
My name is William Hildebrand. I'm a professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology here at the OU Health Sciences Center. My laboratory is working on vaccine development for COVID-19, and I was asked to come and talk today to share my knowledge of COVID-19 vaccines.
All right, well, so why don't you start with just give us a kind of an overview of what's been going on in your research lab.
There's a number of strategies to develop COVID-19 vaccines. The strategy that's most common right now is to take a particular portion of the COVID-19 virus, known as the spike, and to plug it into various vaccine constructs. That's done with some knowledge of the virus. We know in the past that when you fight SARS, coronaviruses, you can attack spike and stop the virus. So the initial strategy was to take the spike protein, cut that piece out of the COVID-19 virus and put it into your vaccine. We didn't make that assumption. We wanted to test and say, in people that are protected from the virus, what part of this COVID-19 virus did they recognize? And then when we know which part of the COVID-19 virus confers protection, we'll put that into a vaccine. So our strategy's been a little bit different, and right now we've identified which targets we would put into a vaccine. We have a basket of targets, and we're winnowing that basket down to a few targets that we would include in a vaccine. So that's what we've been doing. Which of the targets that we identified that people use to successfully fight the virus, and then those would be ready for use in a vaccine.
So everyone wants to know, when will your vaccine be ready to go? Then we'll talk about a bigger picture.
Well, I would probably reverse that question.
Oh, okay.
And say, what are the estimates on when vaccines will be ready? Because I'm sure several of your sources have asked, when will a vaccine be ready? So if you ask Dr. Fauci, it's 12 to 18 months. That's his estimate right now. It'll be 12 to 18 months before a vaccine is ready. There's one of the vaccine constructs is Moderna's RNA vaccine. Moderna estimates that they could deliver their vaccine at the beginning of the year, so 2021, January. And then Pfizer, they also have an RNA vaccine, so the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are easiest to manufacture. They suggest that theirs could be ready in October. So there's differing opinions as to when they can be ready. And we probably want to talk about Operation Warp Speed at some point, because this is a very unique program that's underway in the United States right now, or worldwide actually, that's allowing us to speed delivery. So would you like me to talk about Operation? So Operation Warp Speed is a government agency, BARDA, BARDA, is giving billions of dollars to, let's say, AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca's vaccine is in the lead. They're farthest along, let's say. They're in phase 3 clinical trials. They're getting $1.2 billion, I believe, from the US government, from BARDA, as part of Operation Warp Speed. They're developing and testing their vaccine, but very unusual is they're also making doses of the vaccine. So multiple groups are doing this. They're getting government money, and they're not only testing the vaccine, but they're making the vaccine and getting it ready for delivery, making millions of doses. So that's why these things could hit the market sooner than one expects, because this has never been done before. This is completely unparalleled, this Operation Warp Speed, where you test the vaccine scientifically and also prepare the vaccine to go in the event that it tests successfully. So that's why Pfizer thinks they could be ready to go by October. Moderna thinks they could be ready by January. And Dr. Fauci, who's a little bit more, let's say, seasoned, is a little bit more realistic, is saying that we don't know. So it might be a year to a year and a half before we have a vaccine.
Interesting. In the past few weeks, this is a question from Julian at the OU Daily. Have there been any new developments or adaptations to the virus that would affect the vaccine development?
So I would reinterpret the question is the virus changing, mutating, and adjusting itself to avoid vaccines or to change the vaccine strategy? And I would say no. All humans change, viruses change, all living organisms change. Some change at a quicker speed, some change at a slower speed. This virus does change, but it's not excessive. It's not like HIV where it mutates very quickly. So we do see some variations in this COVID-19 virus, but its enzymes have a proofreading capacity, which means that there's not extensive changes in this virus. And these changes are not altering the vaccine strategy.
Interesting. So what if human trials look like so far? Are there any long-term effects we should worry about from the vaccine?
We don't know about long-term effects. And maybe some of the previous people that have talked have discussed it, but there's phase 1, 2, and there's preclinical. I think right now there's 140 vaccines that haven't gone to any type of clinical trials. That are experimental vaccines that are being tested. That's an estimate. There's 10 vaccines that are in
worldwide.
Yes, worldwide. There's 10 vaccines that I know of that are in phase 1. There's another 9 that are in phase 2 clinical trials, and there's 4 that are in phase 3 clinical trials. So the vaccine, there's quite a few vaccines being tested. These that are going into phase 3 are just happening. I mean, these are just released. The phase 1 is safety testing. I'm not sure if you or your listeners are so phase 1 is safe. We give it to a dozen people, 10 people, 20 people. Does it cause any damage? 70% of the vaccines get through phase 1 unscathed, so they go to phase 2. Phase 2 is 100 people, hundreds of people, let's say. So they'll test it in 100 people, and they'll look for additional safety. Does it cause any problems? And do you have any indication that it might work? Like here with this virus, we're looking for antibodies to the virus, neutralizing antibodies. And then phase 3, which is just, I think that AstraZeneca is in phase 3s, and Moderna this week says they're going to phase 3. AstraZeneca, which is AstraZeneca Oxford, which has 1.2 billion of the Operation Warp Speed BARDA funds, is going to phase 3. They have 10,000 people enrolled, and they're expanding that up to 50,000 people enrolled. So there's a lot of progress going on right now with these vaccines. They're going into phase 3 clinical trials, and they're passing phase 2 clinical trials, which means they appear to be, in 100 or so people, safe, and they seem to have some type of immune response that's desired. And typically in vaccine development, so 70% get through phase 1, only a third get through phase 2, and then less than a third get through phase 3. So that's kind of what your odds are in this vaccine development pipeline.
So if there's only 4 that are going to phase 3, 1 might make.
Traditionally, yes. And that's why you get Dr. Fauci, who's been, as I said, has been doing this for some time. He doesn't have stock to sell. He doesn't have any financial investment in this. He's saying that he knows what the odds are. He knows what can happen. So he's a little bit more conservative in his predictions as to when we'll have a vaccine.
And are there any of these later stage 2 and 3 trials going on in Oklahoma? Or?
I think that Integris, you can't hold me to this. One of the PhDs in my lab has offered to enroll in the Moderna study, which I believe was Integris. So I know that there are medical centers in Oklahoma that are enrolling patients. In our last interview that we did, we had asked Dr. Jennifer Holter Chakrabarty if anything was going on here, and the answer was no. But that this is changing quickly. Mm-hmm. So I think Moderna has something going on in the state of Oklahoma, and possibly AstraZeneca.
Okay. Let's see. So one reporter's asking if we feel like the speed of which the vaccine's being created sacrifices the quality in any way, but this test they have to go through is going to be the same no matter what, right?
Yes. With any therapy, with anything practiced in the clinic, there's always a risk. And you're doing a risk reward weighting system. So you're looking, if we went back and looked at the polio vaccine, there were some adverse reactions to the polio vaccine. There's an adverse reaction to every drug. So what you're really doing is you're weighing what are, in these clinical trials, these phase 3 clinical trials, phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials. So far with the vaccines we've seen, which is the Pfizer and the Moderna, I think it's 70% of the people report headaches and fever. Both are mild, and there's some soreness at the site of delivery. Most of these responses have been mild. Very few to no hospitalizations associated with it. So you've had a mild fever and a mild headache, which they treat with which they treat with over-the-counter drugs, and so there haven't been large adverse reactions, and we're testing it in more people. So that's what takes the time, is to test it in tens of thousands of people for these adverse reactions.
So you brought up the polio vaccine. I think this is an interesting time to just maybe, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of how does the history of the development of vaccines and how diseases have progressed throughout history, how does that affect your work today and the researchers' work today?
Well, if you looked at the polio vaccine, I think we declared a polio epidemic about 1900 in this country. 1921, Franklin Delano Roosevelt contracts polio. And then we had the iron lung and other things. 1954, before Salk launches his vaccine for polio virus. This is a vaccine that they take the virus and they kill it, and then they deliver it into you. And it takes multiple doses. And the vaccines we're seeing be developed right now for COVID-19 are they've put their eggs in different baskets. Some require multiple doses, some don't. So with the first polio vaccine, which was they kill the virus and then inject it into your muscles, intramuscular, you might require multiple doses, and you would get protection from the virus in your bloodstream, but you could still acquire the virus. So you could get infected by orally taking it in, get it in your intestine, and it got into your blood and you had immunity to it in your blood, but you could still get it and pass it along. So will these first COVID-19 vaccines be something that prevent you from getting it into your lungs and into your throat? Or will you get it and be able to spread it, but not have it disseminate into your bloodstream because you have protective antibodies? That we don't know. So that was the first polio vaccine. So Salk developed that, and it was then 6 years later that we came up with the Sabin vaccine, which is a live polio virus that you take orally, which gives you intestinal immunity, which means you never get infected. And at times we've even switched back to Salk, but mostly now we use the Sabin live vaccine. So what we don't know, what's interesting is, you were asking me before, what are we doing here at OUHSC for vaccine development? And you might think that with billions of dollars of government money going in to support these initial vaccines, that you would just give up and stop. We don't know what kind of protection you're going to get from these. We don't know if elderly will be protected, if young will be protected with this, maybe one or the other, if it'll need to be augmented with maybe the targets that we have, or if a different vaccine will need to be for one population versus another. So that's what I would say that polio has taught us. It's taught us the timeline and the fact that sometimes the first vaccine can be quite effective and save many lives, but it might be augmented by a different vaccine at some point in the future.
Wow. We're done with polio though, right? Polio's
Well, mostly.
Okay. So interesting. Okay, so timeline. As somebody was asking, as we enter flu season, do we feel concerned that, and really this year's flu season, we probably wouldn't be ready to really be giving both vaccines anyway, but do they look at things like that with things that you would have to get on a regular basis, like every year you get the flu vaccine, so if you also have to get the COVID vaccine every year or whatever, do they look at those kind of things?
Well, right now, I don't think we know if COVID-19 is going to have an impact on influenza. Will it decrease influenza? Will it occupy of, part of the population that influenza would otherwise occupy. My feeling is, and I haven't talked to the influenza vaccine developers, is that right now, just as they are every year, they're looking in the southern hemisphere, in Australia, for what virus strains of influenza are circulating, and they're preparing the vaccine. So my intuition tells me that they're preparing the influenza vaccine for this fall, just like they do for every fall, just like they do every fall, and that will be prepared, not knowing when when a COVID-19 vaccine will be ready, and not knowing if the precautions that we're taking right now with masks and and hand sanitization are going to help prevent the spread of influenza. So they'll have the influenza vaccine ready to go, but it's hard to tell what the impact of COVID-19, especially with us all wearing masks and taking better precautions, are going to be on influenza.
So, magic question: until the vaccine becomes available, what should we be doing to prevent the spread of COVID-19?
Well, my wife listens to doctor radio all the time, and I can just reiterate what every doctor on doctor radio, researcher: wear a mask and wash your hands. Wash your hands frequently and wear a mask. This spreads, and Dr. Bratzler will have addressed this in several interviews, this spreads by droplets from your mouth, is one of the predominant ways that you spread it. So if you wear a mask, you prevent that spread, and if you wash your hands, it makes it harder to pick it up.
This question from the Oklahoma: why is developing a COVID-19 vaccine so important?
Oh, it's just a considerable morbidity and mortality. There's several directions to look at this. So it's easily spread, so easily spread. It affects a large segment of the population, so many people can get it. Seems like children get the virus, but their mortality rate is low. Elderly are certainly highly affected. Look at the economic consequences we've had of this virus shutting things down. So I would say that, causes significant morbidity, considerable mortality, and it has tremendous economic consequences as well. It's not like mankind hasn't had these before. We talked about polio, we've had influenza, we've had other things with which to deal before, but this is something that we've got to do. If you look at the prosperity we've had since we've come out with some of these other vaccines, it's been remarkable. So if you look at the period of prosperity that humankind has had since we've had the polio vaccine and the influenza vaccine, and now you see this step backwards that COVID-19 can make you take. I think it's very easy to see what the advantages of these vaccines are.
Well, it seems like throughout the maybe last 10 years or so, I've seen illnesses come and go that we've been terrified of, but they've just gone away. We haven't needed a vaccine, but this one moves too fast, I guess.
This one is it's much like the measles vaccine. We were talking about, they talk about herd immunity. The vaccine gives us herd immunity, and to some extent, by people getting infected and developing immunity, the herd's getting somewhat immune. With different polio virus, I think we need 50 to 60% of the herd needs to be immune, and then the virus can't spread. With the measles virus, it needs to be 70 to 80% of the population needs to be immune, because the virus spreads very easily. And that's what this virus does. It spreads very easily by coughing, sneezing, expelling droplets of moisture with the virus in it. It comes out at a high titer. So this virus spreads very easily and infects very readily. You don't have to take in a lot of virus to get infected. Sometimes you can spread it easily, you can spread a lot of it, and then the person that picks it up doesn't need to have a lot of virus get into their body in order for them to get infected. So this virus may need a herd immunity of 70 or 80% before we can stop it.
Where are these vaccines coming from? Who's doing the research? Now, you've already talked about this somewhat, but.
Well, it's to me, so I'm at a university, and we also have biotech companies here in Oklahoma. So this is very interesting to me, because what you're seeing is an unprecedented interaction of the public-private sectors. The vaccine that's in its testing is farthest along is Oxford University, Oxford University has a spin-off company whose name escapes me at the minute. And then those Oxford, the spin-off company, and AstraZeneca have partnered together. And then they've taken billions of dollars from governments in addition. So it's a public-private partnership to move this along. So that's been very interesting. It's been everybody's in. The government's in, the companies are in, the universities are in, and they're all setting aside any type of barrier to this. So I think that, to me, that's been very exciting to see everybody come together, put aside the differences and say, the most important thing is coming up with a vaccine to this. How do we do that? So to me, I think that was the question is, I think the most interesting thing is how everybody's come together. AstraZeneca has done that. Pfizer is working with BioNTech. I don't know how much government money they've taken, but they've taken some. Moderna is working with the National Institutes of Health. So there's all of these public-private partnerships pooling resources and using those to move forward. And I think that's challenging, and it'll draw as much criticism as it does applause, but I think it's very exciting.
Okay, some of these questions looks like we might have already talked about. Every single one of the next questions you've already discussed. So is there anything else that you would like to add?
It's an interesting time to be developing vaccines. I mean, this COVID-19 pandemic has challenged us to go back and relook at how we did polio, relook at how we do the influenza vaccine, re-examine what we've done for failures and successes in the past. And it's really challenged people to come up with new paradigms for doing this. So I think it's, if you're able to separate yourself, if it's not your family members who are sick, it's very interesting to step back and watch this to see how will this manufacturing and doing the research and clinical trials in parallel, orthogonally, how will that work? How is it going to work? Is the first generation vaccine that primarily generates protective antibodies going to be enough? Will those antibodies keep the virus from getting into your lungs? So scientifically and clinically, I think it's very interesting to follow this, and I'm happy that I can be at OUHSC and somehow try and contribute to it.